Welcome to Listen Storyzen and Enjoy Game channel, a place where stories don't just entertain but reveal hidden truths. Today's story begins with silence and ends with a truth no one saw coming, one that may change how you see love forever. I am 62 years old now, and people often say I look peaceful, as if my calm comes from a life well lived, but they are wrong because I was married for 3 years and my husband never touched me. Not once. And the most disturbing part is that I didn't understand why until it was far too late. My name is Margaret Hale, but when this began I was a 24-year-old who believed patience could fix anything, that silence was strength, and that love was earned through endurance. I lived in a quiet Midwestern town in Indiana with my widowed mother and younger sister after my father's sudden death, working as a school library assistant and holding tightly to the beliefs I was raised with. A good woman is patient, modest, waits, and never questions her marriage. Then I met David Carter, a calm, respected, deeply religious man admired by everyone, especially my mother, who told me a man like him was a blessing not to be questioned, so I didn't. Our courtship was careful and distant, which I mistook for virtue, and 6 months later he proposed in church, and I said yes without hesitation. Our wedding was beautiful, and that night I waited nervously for what I had been taught mattered, but he simply said he was exhausted, kissed my forehead, turned off the light, and lay beside me without touching me. I told myself it was normal that marriage took time, that tomorrow would come, but it never did. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and every night he had an excuse or said nothing at all, turning away and falling asleep, while I lay awake beside a man who felt unreachable, trapped in a loneliness that whispered instead of screamed. When I finally asked if something was wrong, he spoke vaguely of a personal medical issue and asked for patience, and I gave it because that's what I had been taught to do. Outside we appeared perfect, sharing meals, attending church, smiling as people called us lucky. While inside, an invisible wall grew between us. I tried everything to change myself, but nothing changed him, and the silence became heavier than any argument, slowly breaking me until I learned to cry without sound, to believe something was wrong with me, and eventually to stop asking questions altogether. But the truth was already there, waiting, watching, and ready to destroy everything I believed, and one day a stranger would look at me and ask, "Are you happy, or are you just pretending?" And for the first time in my life, I wouldn't know how to lie. The question did not come from someone close to me, but from a woman who had no reason to protect my comfort and no fear of breaking my illusion. Her name was Evelyn Brooks, a senior staff coordinator who had recently joined the school. She was unlike anyone in my small, polite world because she spoke directly, laughed loudly, and carried a confidence that made people either admire or avoid her. I did both. At first I kept my distance, unused to women who didn't soften their truth, but somehow she noticed me. One quiet afternoon in the break room as I stirred my tea in silence, she looked at me without smiling and simply asked, "Are you happy?" The question hit harder than it should have, yet I answered the way I had trained myself to answer everything. Yes, quick, polite, practiced, a perfect lie, but she didn't accept it. Instead, she leaned back and studied me before asking the question that made my heart stop. "Does your husband touch you?" I snapped that it wasn't her business, but she remained calm, almost certain, and said softly, "You don't look like a newly married woman, you look lonely." That word followed me home, echoing in my mind, because loneliness is not about being alone. It is about being unseen. For the first time, I felt exposed. Weeks later, at my mother's insistence, I visited a doctor because she believed something must be wrong since I wasn't expecting a child. I agreed because it was easier than explaining a truth I hadn't accepted. In that quiet, ordinary clinic, after routine questions and careful, evasive answers, something shifted in the doctor's expression. A pause, a hesitation. Then she asked again how long I had been married. When I said almost a year, she looked at me and said something that shattered everything. "You have never had marital relations." I laughed in disbelief, insisting there must be a mistake because I was married, but she gently told me what my body showed. I was still a virgin, the word echoed in my mind. Married but untouched, unreal, impossible. When I left the clinic, the world looked the same, but everything inside me had changed. Suddenly, all the excuses no longer fit. That night, I watched David differently. I noticed the way he avoided looking at me, the stiffness when I touched him, the absence of any real attention. As I replayed months of memories, they finally began to make sense. I didn't confront him because deep down I already knew, and I wasn't ready to hear it out loud. Instead, I started watching, listening, paying attention. That's when I noticed the Saturdays. At first, they seemed harmless. Then they became a pattern. Every week, the same careful preparation. The same quiet excitement I had never seen at home. He checked his reflection, adjusted his clothes, and carried a subtle energy that disappeared when he returned, replaced by distance. His phone rang more often. He always left the room to answer. When I asked, he dismissed it too quickly, until one Saturday I told him I was visiting my sister. After he left, I followed him. My heart pounded as I watched him take a bus, not to work or a colleague, but to a quiet street at the edge of town. He entered an ordinary apartment building and disappeared inside. I waited, shaking, until finally the door opened. He came out, but he wasn't alone. A man stood beside him, tall, relaxed, laughing with him. I froze as I saw a look on David's face I had never seen before. Not with me, not once. They walked close together, too close. Then the man placed his hand on David's back, not casually, not accidentally, intimately, and David did not pull away. In that moment I saw it clearly. Affection, real, natural, unforced, the kind I had been waiting for in a marriage that had never given it to me. I stepped back before they could see me. My mind was spinning, everything suddenly made sense. And yet nothing did. I returned home before him and sat in silence. When he walked in, he smiled as if nothing had happened. He asked about my day, and I realized something terrifying. I was living with a stranger. That night, for the first time, I didn't cry. Something inside me had changed. The sadness remained, but it was now mixed with something else, truth. And the truth has a way of rising, no matter how long you try to avoid it. Soon I would do something I had never done before. I would break the silence. There is a strange moment just before everything falls apart. It is quiet, too quiet, as if the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for you to notice what has already changed. That was the kind of silence that filled my home the following Sunday afternoon. I wasn't supposed to be there. David thought I would be gone for hours, visiting my mother, attending a small gathering, continuing the routine version of myself he had grown comfortable with, but plans change and sometimes truth enters through the smallest crack. When I stepped inside the house, it felt different. Not louder, not messier, just unguarded. His jacket was draped over the chair, his shoes near the door, and on the bedroom dresser sat his phone, face down, forgotten. In all our time together, I had never touched it, not once, because I believed deeply that trust meant not looking, even when your heart was breaking. But that day something inside me felt tired. Tired of protecting a silence that was slowly destroying me. Tired of being loyal to a version of marriage that didn't exist. My hands trembled as I picked it up. For a moment I almost put it back, almost walked away, almost chose ignorance one more time, but then I remembered the doctor's words, "You are still a virgin," and something hardened inside me. The screen lit up. There were messages unread and one name appeared again and again, Michael. My chest tightened. I knew that name, not personally, but I had heard it before, carelessly mentioned, quietly dismissed. I opened the messages, and in that moment my life split into two versions, the one before I knew and the one after. The words weren't hidden, weren't coded, weren't careful. They were honest, painfully, beautifully, brutally honest. I miss you already. Yesterday wasn't enough. I can still feel you. Next Saturday, same place. My hands started shaking harder, but I couldn't stop reading. There were messages about time spent together, about moments I had never seen, about a connection that was alive, vibrant, real. And then there were words that made my stomach drop. Words about touch, about closeness, about a kind of intimacy that had never existed in my marriage. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed because my legs could no longer hold me. This wasn't an affair, not in the way I had imagined, not a mistake, not a moment of weakness. This was a relationship, a full life, a truth that had been living right beside me while I slept in silence. I kept reading until the words blurred, until meaning dissolved, until I felt nothing, not anger, not yet, not even heartbreak, just emptiness, because something inside me had already understood what my mind was still trying to process. I had never been his wife. I had been his cover, his shield, his way of surviving a world that would never accept the truth he was living, and I had been the price. When I finally put the phone down, the room felt unfamiliar, like I was standing in someone else's life. I don't remember how long I sat there. Minutes, hours, time had lost meaning until I heard the door open. David was home. His footsteps were the same, calm, measured, predictable, but now every sound felt different. He walked into the bedroom and stopped. He saw me sitting there, still silent, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw fear in his eyes. "Margaret," he said softly. I looked up, and when I spoke, my voice didn't shake. "Where were you?" He paused just for a second, but it was enough. "Work," he replied, the same lie, the same calm tone, the same rehearsed answer. I nodded slowly, then said something that changed everything. "Sit down." He didn't argue or question. He sat, and the silence between us grew heavy, final. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I wasn't searching for love, I was searching for truth. I read your messages, I said quietly. The words hung in the air. He closed his eyes, and in that moment I knew. No denial, no confusion, no defense, just surrender. I'm sorry, he whispered, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the truth to settle between us. I waited because part of me still needed to hear it out loud, clear, undeniable. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly now. I always knew, he said. The words felt distant, like they were coming from somewhere far away. I tried to change, he continued. I prayed, I believed marriage would fix it. Fix it. That word echoed painfully in my chest. I thought if I did everything right, if I lived the way I was supposed to, it would go away. I stared at him, trying to understand how someone could build an entire life on a hope that was never real. Then why me? I asked. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was broken. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his answer hurt more than anything else. Because you were safe. Safe, not loved, not chosen, safe, a good woman, a quiet woman, a woman who wouldn't question, a woman who would endure. In that moment everything inside me shattered, but strangely something else began to form. Clarity. Because suddenly all the pain I had carried, all the doubt, all the nights I blamed myself, none of it belonged to me. I wasn't unwanted. I had never been seen. There is a difference, and realizing that changed everything. The tears came then, slow and silent, not just for the marriage, but for the woman I had been inside it, the one who waited, who blamed herself, who tried to become someone else for a man who had never truly chosen her. I can't do this, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. I won't live like this. He nodded, as if he had always known this moment would come. I understand, he whispered, and for the first time he told the truth, not to protect himself, not to hide, but because there was nothing left to hide behind. Leave, I said, no anger, no screaming, just finality. He stood slowly and looked at me one last time, as if searching for something, forgiveness, understanding, but I had nothing left to give. When the door closed behind him, the house fell silent, a different kind of silence this time, not heavy, not suffocating, but empty, and in that emptiness I did something I hadn't done in years. I cried, not quietly, not carefully, but fully, because sometimes breaking is the only way to finally be free. That night I thought the story was over. I thought I had reached the truth, but I was wrong, because what I didn't know yet was this. The biggest twist of my life was still waiting, and it wouldn't just change how I saw my marriage, it would change how I saw myself forever. People think the hardest part is discovering the truth. It is. The hardest part is learning how to live after it. The days after David left felt unreal, like I was moving through someone else's life, watching everything from a distance. The house was quiet, but this time the silence wasn't hiding anything. It was honest, and somehow that made it heavier. I didn't go to work, didn't answer calls, didn't open the curtains. I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of my marriage, but now everything looked different. His kindness felt like distance, his silence felt like deception, his presence felt like absence. I cried until my body ached, and then I cried more because I realized something terrifying. I didn't just lose a marriage, I lost years of my life to something that was never real. On the third day my mother came. She knocked, then walked in when I didn't answer. When she saw me she froze. I must have looked like someone grieving a death, and in a way I was. She sat beside me quietly, held my hand, and asked the question I had been avoiding. Where is your husband? For the first time I told the truth. Everything. The untouched marriage, the lies, the other man, the messages, the confession. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop, because silence had already taken too much from me. When I finished, she didn't react the way I expected. She didn't shout, didn't blame me, didn't even ask questions. She simply held my hand tighter and whispered a prayer, not for answers but for strength, but truth has a way of spreading. In a town like ours, nothing stays hidden for long. People talked, they always do. Some looked at me with pity, others with judgment, and a few avoided me completely. For a while I felt small, exposed, like my pain had become something public, something people could whisper about over dinner. I stopped going to church. I couldn't sit there pretending everything was fine while my life had collapsed in front of everyone. David tried to contact me with calls, messages, and even came to the house once. He stood at the door looking smaller than I remembered. I just want to talk, he said, but I shook my head. There's nothing left to say, because sometimes closure doesn't come from more words. It comes from accepting that the truth has already said enough. That night I packed a small bag and left, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I finally understood something. That house was never my home. It was a place I survived in, and I was done surviving. Healing didn't come quickly. There was no moment where everything suddenly felt okay. It came slowly, quietly, in small, almost invisible steps. Getting out of bed, going back to work, eating even when I didn't feel hungry, breathing through memories that still hurt. I moved in with my mother for a while, not because I was weak, but because I was finally tired of pretending to be strong all the time. A year later, I changed jobs to a small community college with new people and a new environment, and most importantly, no one knew my story. That anonymity felt like freedom. I started noticing small things again: sunlight through windows, laughter that didn't feel forced, silence that didn't hurt. I changed how I dressed, not for attention or approval, but to recognize myself again, and slowly, very slowly, I began to feel like a person instead of a wound. Therapy changed something inside me, something I didn't even realize needed changing. For the first time, someone told me a truth I had never considered. What happened to you was not your failure. It took time to believe that, but once I did, everything shifted because I finally understood that I was not rejected, I was never chosen, and those are not the same thing. One hurts, the other frees you. Years passed and life moved forward, and then I met Thomas Reed. He wasn't extraordinary in the way stories describe. He didn't arrive like a miracle or sweep me off my feet. He was simply real, kind, honest, steady, a man who didn't hide his flaws and didn't bury his emotions. From the beginning, I told him everything. No secrets, no silence, because I had learned that truth is the only place where love can survive. He listened, didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix me. He just stayed, and for the first time in my life, that was enough. We took things slowly and carefully, and when he finally held my hand, it didn't feel unfamiliar. It felt safe. Real intimacy wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was quiet, natural, and for the first time I understood what I had been missing. We married quietly, no big ceremony, no performance, just two people choosing truth over appearance. We built a life, not perfect but honest. We had children, shared laughter, even arguments, and somehow even the ordinary days felt extraordinary because they were real. Years later, I lost Thomas. Illness took him slowly and painfully, and saying goodbye was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but this time the pain was different. It was clean because I had been loved truly and fully, not as a cover, not as a lie, but as myself. Now at 62, I live alone again, but I am not lonely. I have children, grandchildren, friends, and peace, and sometimes people ask me, do you regret those 3 years? They expect me to say yes, but I don't, because here is the truth, the real truth, the one that changes everything. If my first marriage had been normal, if David had loved me even a little, I would have stayed. I would have lived an ordinary life, a quiet life, a life that looked right but never felt right, and I would have never met Thomas, never known real love, never discovered my own strength. So no, I don't regret it, because the biggest twist of my life wasn't the betrayal. It was this. The thing that broke me was the same thing that saved me. If you are listening to this and something in your life feels wrong, quietly wrong, don't ignore it, because silence is not strength when it is destroying you, patience is not virtue when it is protecting a lie, and love, real love, will never make you feel unseen. You deserve to be chosen, to be touched, to be known, and if you are not, then maybe, just maybe, your ending is actually your beginning. This is Listen, Storyzen, and Enjoy Game, where every story has a truth hidden inside it. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes the stories we listen to are the ones we needed the most.